Esther was a young woman who worked in an office. Her days were always long, but this day had been the hardest. She had stayed late in the office to finish some important work, and by the time she left, it was already close to midnight. The streets outside were quiet, and the city lights looked dull. She walked quickly to the metro station, hoping to catch the last train home. When she reached the platform, there were only a few people waiting. Most of them looked tired like her, keeping their eyes on the ground. Soon, the train arrived with a loud screeching sound. The doors opened, and Esther stepped inside. The cool air inside the coach made her feel a little better. She found an empty seat near the window and sat down. The train began to move, and the sound of the wheels on the tracks filled the air. Esther leaned her head against the glass, watching the lights of the tunnels pass by. She thought about how peaceful it was compared to the busy rush hours. At this time, the metro was almost silent. Only 2 or 3 passengers sat far away from her. She pulled out her phone to check the time. It was already past 12:15 a.m. She sighed and whispered to herself, "Just a few more stops and I'll be home." Her eyes felt heavy, but she tried not to fall asleep. The metro moved smoothly, and at first, everything felt normal. Esther looked at the reflection in the window, where she could see herself looking pale under the dim yellow lights. She closed her eyes for a second, trying to rest. At that moment, she felt a strange chill in the air, but she ignored it. To her, it was just another late-night ride. She had no idea that tonight's journey would be nothing like before. This would be the ride that changed everything forever. The metro moved forward, carrying Esther deeper into the city's tunnels. At first, everything seemed normal. The soft sound of the wheels and the faint humming of electricity in the lights gave her comfort. But soon, she noticed something strange. The usual automated announcements that always came before every stop had suddenly stopped. Normally, a calm female voice would say, "Next station," but now there was only silence. Esther sat up straight and looked around. There had been a few other passengers earlier. A man in a gray coat, a young woman with headphones, and someone carrying a small bag. But now, when she scanned the seats, she realized something shocking. Every single one of them was gone. She quickly checked both ends of the coach. The doors had not opened since the last station, but still, the passengers had vanished as if they had never been there. Esther's heartbeat grew faster. She was sitting alone. The metro lights flickered once, then steadied again. The sound of the train seemed louder than before, echoing in the empty coach. Esther pulled her bag closer to her lap and whispered, "It's fine. Maybe they moved to another carriage." But deep inside, she felt uneasy. The silence around her grew heavier. The sound of the wheels on the tracks now felt strange, almost like a heartbeat in the dark tunnel. Esther kept checking her reflection in the window, and for the first time, she felt as if the glass was not only reflecting, but also watching her. Her fingers tightened around her phone, but there was no signal underground. She thought about standing up and walking to the next coach, but something inside her told her not to move. She stayed frozen in her seat. It was just the beginning of the night, but already, the metro felt less like a train and more like a trap. Esther was no longer just a passenger. She was the last passenger. Esther sat stiffly in her seat, trying to convince herself that everything was normal. Maybe the other passengers had simply gotten off at the last stop, she thought. But deep inside, she knew something wasn't right. The train sped into another tunnel, and the windows turned into black mirrors. Esther glanced at her reflection in the glass. Her own face looked pale, her tired eyes half open. But then, something caught her attention, something behind her reflection. In the window, she clearly saw a woman sitting 2 rows behind her. The woman was wearing a bright red dress, a strange choice for someone riding the metro at midnight. Her head was slightly bowed, her long black hair covering part of her face. Esther froze, staring at the reflection. Slowly, she turned her head around to look at the seat behind her. Empty. Her chest tightened. She turned back quickly to the window, and once again, The woman in red was there in the reflection, still sitting quietly, as if she belonged in that place. Esther whispered to herself, "No, it's just my mind. I'm tired. I'm just seeing things." She rubbed her eyes and looked again. But the woman remained in the reflection, still as stone, her face hidden. A shiver ran down Esther's spine. She tried to distract herself, pulling her phone out again, but the screen showed only no service. Her hands trembled. She refused to look at the window, but curiosity pulled her eyes back. This time, the woman in the red dress was no longer sitting. In the reflection, she was standing a little closer than before. Esther's lips parted in shock. She turned around again. The seats were empty. Her breath came out in short gasps. The reflection was showing her something that reality was not. She was not alone in the metro anymore. The train roared deeper into the underground, and the tunnels outside the windows turned completely black. There were no lights, no stations, nothing, only endless darkness rushing past. Esther tried to calm herself, but her hands were shaking. The reflection of the woman in the red dress still lingered in her mind. Even though the seat behind her looked empty, Esther could not forget what she saw in the glass. Her heart thumped loudly in her chest. Suddenly, the train lights flickered again, this time longer than before. The yellow glow dimmed until the entire coach was swallowed by darkness for a few seconds. In that darkness, Esther thought she heard something, soft voices, like whispers carried on the air. Esther. Her name. Her head snapped up. She looked around quickly, but no one was there. She told herself she was imagining it, but the whispers came again, a little louder this time. They seemed to come from every direction, bouncing off the walls of the train. Her throat went dry. "Who's there?" she asked in a trembling voice. No answer, only silence. The train rattled forward, but now the familiar sound of the wheels seemed mixed with something else. She could hear faint footsteps, as though someone was slowly walking closer on the metal floor. Esther pressed her back against the seat, clutching her bag tightly. She didn't dare turn around. Her eyes started back to the window, but the reflection showed only herself now. Yet, she felt the heavy presence of someone nearby, breathing softly in the air around her. The lights flickered once more. For a split second, in that half-light, Esther thought she saw a figure standing in the middle of the aisle, a shadowy outline, tall and still. But when the light steadied, the aisle was empty again. Her heart was pounding so loudly she could hear it echo in her ears. Esther now understood something terrifying. She wasn't only alone, she was being watched. Esther sat frozen in her seat, every muscle in her body tense. The silence inside the coach felt heavy, almost alive. She could still hear faint echoes of her name whispering in the air. The train kept moving, but it no longer felt like a normal journey. It felt endless. Then, without warning, the overhead lights blinked and dimmed again. In that flicker, Esther's eyes widened in horror. The woman in the red dress was no longer just in the reflection, she was right in front of her. She sat across the aisle, her back straight, her pale hands folded neatly on her lap. The red dress looked old, almost torn at the edges, and her skin was unnaturally white, like cold marble. Slowly, the woman lifted her head. Esther gasped. Her eyes were pitch black, hollow like empty sockets, and her lips stretched into a slow, unnatural smile. The woman tilted her head slightly and whispered in a voice that sounded both distant and near. "No one leaves the last metro alive." Esther's throat closed up. She tried to speak, but no words came. The woman didn't move, yet Esther felt her presence pressing against her chest like a heavy weight. The air grew colder, and Esther's breath turned shaky and visible, as if the coach had turned into a freezer. She gripped the edge of her seat so hard that her knuckles turned white. Suddenly, the woman leaned forward, her smile widening. Her black eyes seemed to swallow the light around them. Esther let out a small cry and shut her eyes tight. When she opened them again, the seat across from her was empty. But the smell of something old, like dust and rusted metal, lingered in the air. Esther knew she hadn't imagined it. The woman was real, and she wasn't gone. Somewhere inside the train, she was waiting. Esther could no longer sit still. Her chest felt tight, and every breath came in short gasps. The image of the woman in the red dress would not leave her mind. She knew staying in the same seat was dangerous. Somehow, she felt that if she didn't move, the woman would come closer. She stood up quickly, her legs shaking, and rushed to the door that connected her coach to the next one. With trembling hands, she pulled the heavy handle and pushed it open. The metal door screeched loudly as if it hadn't been used in years. The next coach looked exactly the same: empty seats, flickering yellow lights, and silence. Esther stepped inside, her footsteps echoing on the floor. She turned around to look behind her. The coach she had left was empty. The seat where the woman had appeared was bare. She breathed shakily, whispering, "It's okay. Just keep moving." She hurried to the next door and opened it. Again, the same sight, the same rows of seats, the same dim lights, the same silence. It felt as if she had stepped back into the same place. Her heart dropped. No, this isn't possible. Esther tried again. She went through another door, and then another. Every time, she found herself in the same coach, as if the train had no end and no beginning. It was a loop, a trap. The air grew colder, and suddenly she heard soft footsteps behind her. Slowly, she turned her head. At the far end of the coach, the woman in the red dress was standing now, her black eyes fixed on Esther. Panic took over. Esther screamed and ran, her hands pulling at the next door as tears filled her eyes. But when she stepped through, she was back in the same coach again. The woman's whisper followed her through the air. "You cannot escape." Esther's chest burned from running, but there was nowhere left to go. Every door led her back to the same coach, the same flickering lights, and the same chilling silence. It was as if the metro itself had turned into a maze designed to trap her. The train finally began to slow down. Esther felt a moment of relief. Maybe it was stopping at a station. She ran toward the doors, waiting for them to slide open. When they did, she rushed out, stepping onto a deserted platform. The station was dark, lit only by a few weak, buzzing lights. Dust covered the floor and broken tiles lined the walls. It looked abandoned, as if no train had stopped there in years. Esther's breathing echoed in the emptiness. She turned to look back at the metro, and what she saw froze her blood. Inside the coach, through the window, she saw herself, sitting motionless in the same seat where she had first started. Her reflection wasn't moving, wasn't breathing. It was like a lifeless body staring blankly ahead. Esther staggered backward. "No, that's not me. That can't be me," she whispered. But deep inside, she knew the truth. Something had already taken her place inside the train. The sound of heels clicking on the floor made her spin around. The woman in the red dress was standing at the far end of the platform. Her black eyes gleamed, and that crooked smile spread across her pale face. She walked closer, her voice low and cold. "The last passenger never leaves. Now you are part of the curse." The train doors shut with a loud bang, and the metro slowly pulled away, carrying Esther's lifeless reflection into the darkness. On the platform, Esther screamed, but no one heard. The lights flickered once more, and then everything went dark. She was no longer a passenger. She was a prisoner of the last metro. And this was the chilling tale of the last passenger in Metro. Have you ever experienced something strange while traveling late at night? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more horror stories in English.